Right now, you are wearing clothes. You grabbed a shirt this morning, put it on, and walked out the door without a second thought. But if we trace our species back 300,000 years, you will find that for more than half of our time on Earth, clothing did not even exist. Imagine a world where your ancestors walked entirely naked under a brutal sun, sleeping on the cold ground with absolutely zero cover. They spent thousands of generations exposed to sharp thorns, heavy rain, and swarming insects with nothing but their bare skin. So how did we actually survive and transition from that wild existence to the covered life we know today? The true story behind this shift will completely change everything you think you know about human evolution, social anxiety, and the deep emotional cost of what it means to be human. This hidden history begins with an unexpected biological puzzle that scientists found hiding in the most disgusting place possible. To find out what actually happened, we have to look closely at the things our ancestors left behind in the dirt. Let us begin by laying out the hard facts of our shared timeline. When we study the remains of ancient skeletons, we see that modern humans looked just like you and me about 300,000 years ago. Yet, when we look for the tools needed to make clothes, the ground remains completely empty for a massive chunk of that time. The earliest bone needles and stone scrapers used to clean animal skins do not show up until 120,000 years ago. Even more surprising, most experts who study ancient fabrics agree that regular clothing did not become a common thing until roughly 75,000 years ago. Think about that massive gap. We lived, moved, and built families for over 150,000 years without a single stitch of fabric. We spent generations walking through high grass and thick forests under the intense African sun with nothing on our bodies. We faced freezing nights, dry winds, and heavy storms with nothing but our bare skin to face the elements. Our ancestors handled the wild world completely naked for half of our existence, which immediately shatters the most common guess we hear in school. We did not invent clothing to stay warm. It is true that we eventually moved into colder parts of the world, like Europe and Asia, where heavy coats saved our lives. But the archaeological record proves that we started covering our bodies long before we ever left the warm tropics. Staying warm was just a lucky benefit that came much later in our journey. If weather does not explain the mystery, we have to test the next big theory, which is physical protection. We tell ourselves that we needed to guard our bodies against sharp rocks, rough tree bark, and painful insect bites. That sounds perfectly logical at first glance, but there is a major problem with how early clothes were designed. If we made clothes mainly for safety, we would have protected the parts of our bodies that took the most daily beating. We would see early humans wrapping their feet and hands first to avoid cuts and infections while gathering food. Instead, the oldest garments found in almost every ancient culture covered the chest, the back, and the groin first. Those are the exact areas that are already the safest from daily scratches when you walk or climb. Covering our midsection while leaving our hands and feet exposed was not a practical choice for safety. It shows that our ancestors were driven by a completely different kind of pressure. Since the stones and bones could not give us a clear answer, scientists had to look for a biological clock hiding in plain sight. In the year 2003, a brilliant group of geneticists decided to study a very strange living clue to crack the case. They looked at the DNA of lice. Specifically, they wanted to find the exact moment when head lice split and created a totally new species known as body lice. This distinction is incredibly important because head lice can only survive in the hair on your head. Body lice are completely different because they live exclusively in human clothing, hiding in the seams and laying their eggs in the fabric. They literally cannot survive without clothing to cling to. By measuring the tiny mutations in their DNA, the researchers traced the birth of this textile-dependent parasite. The genetic data showed that body lice officially split from head lice around 170,000 years ago. This discovery gave us the oldest hard biological timestamp for human clothing in existence. We did not learn this from a primitive needle or a cave painting, but because a tiny bug had to change its entire biology just to live in the things we started wearing. But knowing the date still does not tell us the underlying motive. It only proves that wearing things had already become a permanent daily habit by that time. The real origin goes back much further into the quiet growth of the human mind, way before we can measure it with physical tools. The real answer lives inside a massive mental shift that happened to our ancestors. In the year 2009, an archaeologist named Ian Gilligan published a deep analysis that changed how we think about this behavior. He argued that making clothes was never a practical invention, but a deeply symbolic one. To make and wear a garment, your brain has to perform a massive trick that no other animal can do. You have to look at a raw animal hide. Imagine a future version of yourself wearing it and plan out the steps to make it happen. You have to spend days scraping the skin, drying it, and sewing it together for a moment that has not arrived yet. That sounds like a very simple routine to us today, but it requires an incredible amount of mental power. It means you have to possess an advanced memory, a strong sense of time, and the ability to imagine tomorrow. This is the exact same mental machinery we use today to keep our promises, plan our careers, or worry about things that might go wrong next week. A chimpanzee can use a stick to catch bugs, but it will never look at a large leaf and save it to wear next Tuesday. We are the only ones who can see into the future like that. The moment we started covering ourselves, we were not just protecting our skin from the world. We were showing the very first physical proof that our minds had awakened. But there is an even deeper, more emotional reality underneath this newfound mental power. It is a quiet truth that most evolutionary textbooks prefer to skip because it feels uncomfortable. It is the sudden birth of deep human shame. We do not mean shame in a religious way, but in a purely neurological sense. It is that sudden, heavy awareness that you are being perceived by the people around you. It is the uncomfortable feeling that your bare body is being watched, measured, and judged by the group. To feel this deep vulnerability, your brain needs what psychologists call a theory of mind. This is the rare ability to step outside your own head and imagine what you look like through someone else's eyes. Dogs do not experience this social anxiety, and birds do not worry about their appearance. Even our closest animal relatives do not show any real signs of tracking how others view their bodies. But somewhere along our long journey, we developed this psychological mirror. We became capable of looking at ourselves from the outside. And once that mental switch clicked, the way we lived in this world changed forever. So what happens when a whole species suddenly realizes it can be seen from the outside looking in? The moment that mental switch flipped, our entire world changed forever. Survival was no longer just about finding clean water, gathering wild berries, or running away from dangerous predators. Instead, life became about how you looked to the tribe, how you were perceived by your peers, and what your appearance signaled to the rest of the group. From that exact point in our history, clothing was never truly about protecting the skin from nature. It was invented to protect the ego from the judgment of the community. It became a powerful way to build a personal identity and control your public image. The very first person who tied a piece of cured leather around their waist was doing something deeply revolutionary. They were deciding exactly how they wanted the rest of the world to see them. Once that idea took hold of our minds, we could never go back to being naked because the body was no longer just a body. It became a canvas for communication. You can see this truth clearly when you look at how human societies grew larger and more complex over time. As small family bands merged into massive tribes, strangers suddenly had to live alongside strangers every day. In a crowded village, you could no longer know every single person on a first-name basis, so we turned clothing into our very first social technology, using it as a silent, instant communication system. Before you ever said a word, your outfit told people who you were, what group you belonged to, and whether you were a friend or a threat. It signaled your rank and your status around the ancient campfire. We did not start wearing clothes because we were cold. We started wearing clothes because we became deeply aware. Here's the part that connects directly to your life today. Because we all carry the heavy weight of modern life, we struggle with social anxiety, the pressure to look perfect, and the constant fear of being judged by others. When you feel a wave of panic because you wore the wrong outfit to an event, remember this deep history. That sudden discomfort is not shallow vanity. That is 170,000 years of ancient survival instincts running inside your modern brain. Your mind is simply running the same calculations that kept your ancestors safe around the fire. We solved the basic problems of physical nature a long time ago, but we still carry the psychological vulnerability of a creature that knows it is being watched. We cannot turn off this ancient machinery, but we can learn to be much gentler with our flaws. Your insecurities just mean you are a conscious human being trying to find your place in the tribe. If this perspective brought you a little bit of peace today, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing these deep conversations together. Thank you for sitting with us by the fire, and we will see you next time.